Hi, I'm Alaina Percival, CEO and co founder of Women Who Code, and I have the great honor of being here today with Candice Morgan, who I have gotten to know over the years because she's a board member with Women Who Code and just an incredible human. Candice, can I turn it over to you just to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for the warm introduction. It's been such a pleasure working with you and with Women Who Code over the years, and I look forward to many more. I currently lead equity, diversity, and inclusion at GV, Google Ventures, and as the head of ED&I for short. I work on a few key initiatives, probably more than a few, but the ones that I'll mention are specifically in one, supporting our portfolio. We have over 450 portfolio companies as a firm. We have $8 billion dollars assets under management. And I advise our founders and our teams into how to build an inclusive culture early, how to build an inclusive product, and how to connect with a diverse set of customers and stakeholders. I also focus on our investing itself and the pipeline of entrepreneurs that we get to meet, making sure we connect with fund managers and entrepreneurs across underrepresented backgrounds as part of our flow. And then finally, I also work internally on who we hire and the partnerships that we make across the venture capital ecosystem.
That's amazing. So the work that you're doing, it's so critical. It's critical for the ecosystem, for the organization. Can you just tell us a little bit about, why this work is important, and also specifically for diverse women founders?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I previously come from leading inclusion and diversity at Pinterest, and one of the things I said on my last day to the team at the time was, I'm really interested in being part of discovering the next founder or CEO of Pinterest that's a woman of color. Like the opportunity to unlock and work with very talented women and non-binary and other gender minority founders and ethnic minority founders across all backgrounds, and help them build and scale large businesses that will, kind of be in everyone's, part of everyone's day at some point is tremendous. And the obstacles that abound in trying to build a business are also tremendous. And there are some very specific obstacles that underrepresented groups may face, just simply not being as represented in both investing and as, multi-billion unicorn founders. So I feel like it's important to just pay attention to the process and make it as equitable as possible. And that's what I hope to make impact on.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's so important. So have you seen, or I mean, you get to meet so many people, you get to see them at different stages, the high highs, the low lows. What are some of the great qualities that you've seen in diverse founders?
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I was speaking to a few different founders in our portfolio, and interestingly, they were all underrepresented. I work with all founders in our portfolio that are trying to build really inclusive, highly engaged cultures. But it so happened that these three founders that I connected with, the first was someone who grew up in a very underprivileged neighborhood, underprivileged circumstances, ended up studying engineering and becoming this incredible graphic designer and building a company as a result. And, hadn't seen that path, but created that path. So that sense of both being pioneering, seeing what's out there, thinking really big, even though you didn't have a role model that you were able to model off of, from a young age, is incredible. And takes a tremendous amount of not only grit, but dreaming really big and believing and having the self-efficacy for those things. Another founder that I spoke with yesterday is from South America and also came from an extremely underprivileged background, came to the US not speaking English, and figured out their way through the education system with very limited resources and is now running an incredible enterprise software company that is growing by the minute. And I had the pleasure of spending an hour just understanding his life story, which is like just such a tiny glimpse. But I was very, very impressed with how, again, he was almost fearless in doing things he had never done before. And then with another founder who she is building an incredible digital health company, and has been very, very intentional about the way she is designing the company and making sure that, for example, she doesn't believe in hierarchy for hierarchy's sake. And so she was talking about how, and her team was talking about how they think about, obviously, leadership, right? There needs to be clarity for the goals and the vision of the company. But a lot of times things get attached to hierarchy and respect, like basic human dignity, that don't need to be there. And so just thinking about how these founders are building their own companies, those are a few incredible qualities that I continue to be inspired by.
Yeah. So just thinking about kind of shifting the conversation to an operational thinking, you're seeing a lot of people who are building many different types of exciting companies and products. What are some of the obstacles that go into building a company that founders don't necessarily think about when they're getting started, that we should be thinking about and preparing, as some of our members might be thinking about becoming founders themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, generally, a founder is pouring blood, sweat, and tears into bringing their vision into reality. And so, they're waking up and breathing and sleeping and dreaming this incredible problem that they're solving, or with a piece of technology or with a service, and it's pretty all consuming. And of course, they're thinking about how to stay afloat, how to raise sufficient capital to keep going. The current macroeconomic environment, notwithstanding, right, then adding even more, there's advice you read every day about like making sure you don't have too much burn and, don't overhire and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that in moving very quickly and trying to grow a large business in a competitive space, thinking about product market fit, that very early culture that you set up is really key. Yesterday I was talking, the day before yesterday, I was talking to another founder who was very deliberate around the first set of technical talent that they hired and making sure that was a diverse group of folks, which then beget more diversity, more referrals, and their technical team looks very different from how a lot of other technical teams are scaling. So I think, obviously from a diversity perspective, like being very deliberate about the early people that you bring in and their networks is important, but also how you set the cultural tone of what you want to build and how you communicate that out to people. Sometimes I run into founders that, have incredible, integrity and standards for people in their business, but don't know how to communicate that out in a certain way. And so setting up, mission, a vision, a set of values, and really like how you're going to live and practice those values in your company as you scale. I think those are just a couple of things that are really important in the culture you're building. And I know we'll get more into the funding element of it as well, because that's naturally it's a challenging, but a very important journey.
Yeah. So actually, I love the direction that you took with that, because certainly at Women Who Code, designing for inclusion is such an important emphasis for us, and creating culture and really changing the shape of business and industry is what we are hoping to achieve through inclusion. So how can founders be building core values and mission early so that they are able to build and maintain a business that is coming from a place of strength early on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first what I would say is I do encounter founders who want to create a workplace different from sometimes some of the things that they've experienced, right? Sometimes that manifests as like, listen, I want to move fast. I don't want to have a lot of bureaucracy. I don't want to have a lot of overhead. I mean, whatever, those things are. Certainly, I want everyone to feel a sense of belonging and inclusion, that their experience within the company isn't in any way dependent on their background or their team or their, demographic status or what have you. And maybe they've experienced some of those things in their prior companies, and they want to make sure that those types of, barriers to one's performance don't get replicated in their companies. And so I do a lot of times will lead our founders through some mission and vision exercises. And sometimes we have, they'll generally have a mission for the company, and we'll work backwards with, okay, well, how to achieve that mission? How do you think about equity within that mission, right? If you're creating something that you want everyone to have access to, what are you doing to make sure that your product or service is something that removes barriers for people? If you're distributed across, multiple countries, how are you making sure that you're bringing employees together for engagement, right? And how are you being deliberate about that, especially in the current hybrid workplace? And some companies doing remote first, they're very deliberate about their culture. I'm thinking about GitLab, one of our companies, and their cultural values. And anyone can read it. They're very transparent about open sourcing what they're doing. But I want to ask you the same question, because I've been consistently impressed with the values that emanate from Women Who Code. But I know that it's not just osmosis; it's by design.
Yeah. So Women Who Code's gone through an evolution around this. Inclusion was always a core value for Women Who Code. But what we realized is that we were kind of relying too heavily on intent, and that we actually needed to be designing for inclusion and going through a process of checking ourselves internally, all of our practices, redeveloping them, having external eyes on it to make sure that we aren't missing something that we should be seeing, and designing all of our practices and processes for inclusion. And then at that point, bringing that external, because we felt very strongly we needed to live that internally before externally. So we've just gone through a full rebrand process. We've gone through and reworked all of our practices, policies, procedures. We've brought in external specialists doing training. So even though Women Who Code is a leader in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we do this for external organizations as well. And we always see ourselves as just taking small, imperfect steps forward, and that it's a continuous journey for us, and that it's critical, but it's also an opportunity. We are reshaping the face of leadership, and we need to make sure that we're designing for that we're building for it. It's not just through intent. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I love that you made the point also about imperfection, because it takes work. Intent is not enough. Sometimes, even with the best of intentions, you build a product or a service that is disproportionately impacting certain groups in ways that you don't want. And you've got to find a way to measure it, get feedback, whether it's getting your user feedback from different parts of your organization and internally. I'm always starting with, what are your feedback loops around your culture and people's experiences, and beyond employee surveys, which we can design, and that can be a really important tool. But are there feedback loops, especially upward feedback? So anyway, I totally agree with what you've shared.
Yeah. So I love the pieces that you were bringing forward around the work that you do in your day to day. So I'm going to jump around just a little bit in my thinking, but one of the benefits that you're actually speaking to is related to funding. So the portfolio companies that are going to and receiving funding from GV have access to thought leadership from people like yourself. And so I think that's a really interesting value point for funding, but it also speaks to finding the right funding partners. It's not just who can you get the money from, but what are they bringing to the table? So as we kind of transition into funding, can you speak to a little bit finding the right funding partners and what that might mean for our founders or potential founders within Women Who Code?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, we, earlier kind of alluded to this. It's a rigorous process. I have so much respect for business leaders and founders that are, continuing to fund and grow their businesses. And the amount of work and thoughtfulness it takes, and some bit of like chemistry really with some of your funders as well. I think the first thing to note is the earliest stages of funding a venture. The earliest source of funding is usually bootstrapped, right? It's savings, it's friends and family, it's even just having the time to work on that venture and start building that product or program. There's also a need for resources on how to build businesses, right? What are I mean, just the very basics of like, incorporating your business and where and how and money management. And then there's the connections that you need to other funders, to talent sources, to mentors, to advisors. So there's so much going on in that universe. And obviously a root cause of inequity, right, is that people are using their own money and their friends and family's money. We have an extreme wealth gap in this country that has not narrowed in any meaningful way over decades. So the first question is really, what kind of funding do I need? And I would say only, a tiny percentage of businesses are venture capital backed. And there are other ways of funding and growing companies. And venture capital is not always the best fit for a certain type of business. In some cases, it's looking at government grants and for entrepreneurs, for small businesses and medium businesses. And that can be in the US, within certain states, there are different types of grants. That could be, in other countries also, there are different types of small business grants to look out for. And when I talk sometimes to founders who have decided to bootstrap through later stages, it's because they are focused on, one, building their product and building their technology, really like investing in that before kind of scaling up the team and growth. They might want to focus on the kind of creative control they have before having a board of advisors that are funding and getting input on the businesses. So just wanted to make a very important point that like venture is not the one and only path. And if you're, let's say, building a sales, you're building a product for consumer sales, does that always make sense to build through, venture funding? Or do you need to be focused on, being in shelves on stores and growing your local community and then getting online and growing from there and finding resources that way? There are non-dilutive capital grants. There are business accelerator programs. There are corporate funds that give non-dilutive capital that then doesn't become like a part of ownership. So it's just very important to look into all of those options and decide which is the right for you. Venture, though, does offer a quick scale to a large amount of funding, especially in businesses that are going to multiply significantly over time, and where you need a lot of that capital upfront to even get to the next stage of growth. So I think, when you move beyond that early bootstrapping phase, now you're going into the super angels. So now you want to get connected with individuals who are putting capital into your organization. Another point of inequity, right? Who's in your network? Your super angels are putting in 25K plus checks. Obviously, they're higher net worth individuals. How do you connect with some of these super angels? It's important to look at companies that you admire that are in your space and find the angels that are typically on those cap tables, right? So people that are funding those businesses, so that you can find the chemistry of people that are interested in businesses like yours. If you're in media, if you're in entertainment, if you're in software, enterprise software, it's important to find those people, connect with them, And whether or not they become an advisor or an investor, they're going to be your source to further sources of funding. And then the last thing, because I'm giving a long answer here, and I'm sure we could drill down quite a bit more. Now you're moving into your seed funding. Now you're focused on even pre-seed, depending on where you are in the business. So now you're focused on getting those bigger checks of a few $1,000,000 or what have you. The last couple of years, the market has been very frothy, so it's kind of hard to say what is seed, but you're generally talking about a $1 to $5 million check, most likely. And now you've got to get into venture capital firms if that's the route that you're going. Another point of inequity: how do you get connections to those firms? I mean, like, sometimes by design, the contact information isn't like written on anyone's forehead on the website. And hopefully those angel connections that you've started to make, any accelerators or founder communities that you've joined, can help point you into the right direction of firms that invest in your area. And I think it's important to note that there's a chemistry between the investor and the founder, because you're going to be working with this person for years, right? I've heard, my team members have described it as a marriage, right? And so you can have an amazing idea and right concept that you present to the wrong investor just because it's not their area or their interest, or they're overboarded, or they don't have capacity. That doesn't mean that your idea isn't a good one and you shouldn't pursue more connections elsewhere.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned kind of founder communities. Do you have any other pro tips for the people who are coming up against some of those inequities of not already having the connections, not having the rich relatives to be able to write the big checks? What is a pro tip that you have to start to make those initial connections that lead to more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm starting to, it's not new, but there are certain communities that have been specifically geared towards founders who might be underrepresented, and certain partners that you can connect with. One of the organizations that's been around for some years now is All Raise, and All Raise is focused on women in venture, and they have a very active founder community, and they create founder cohorts. We're a sponsor, as many firms are, where you can connect with other founders in your industry and obviously get important intel. They also have a very strong women in investing component. So that's one such community. Digital Undivided is a community, especially if we're going even earlier stage at that kind of, let me get my first round, I'm just thinking about exploring this business. Sometimes they do also kind of micro funding. They do pitch competitions, that sort of thing. But they're focused on women of color. And they've been around for many years. And I really admire what they're doing. And they are not just focused on companies that are going to be venture backed forever, but they have kind of tentacles in a lot of different places. So those are a couple of communities. There are so many online founder communities too, and even people using things like tools like Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse and others, meetup groups. I'm thinking about crypto. There are so many meetup programs, Discord rooms, et cetera, where you can meet other founders. Even physical spaces, WeWorks, Soho House, what have you. I'm naming these brands, but where founders come to meet and find space. There are founder studios. And so I'd say do some research on some of your different communities and geographies, because they're very kind of different known founder meetup spaces in different places. If you're in Atlanta, or if you're in New York, or if you're in NSF or in Boston. And then there are groups like Black VC and, Latinx VC, which is more focused on the investor community, but obviously you want to get to know investors, right? So try to find out who, some of these members of these communities are. And cold outreach, if you're, I don't know, a single founder that isn't a hustler, people really shoot their shot. And it really sometimes works if you speak to that investor and you've taken a look at their portfolio and they're kind of in your space. It can really work. So I'd say don't hesitate to shoot your shot.
Yeah. Those are all great and really specific, insightful ways to connect with people. Women Who Code is a Y Combinator company. And so also some of the strong accelerators do an incredible job at connecting you with investors.
Yes. Y Combinator,
Which,
Techstars. Yep. Excellent.
yeah, you started to touch on it pretty significantly in that last question, but what's some of the role of community? And obviously, I'm very biased as Women Who Code is the largest and most active community of diverse women technologists in the world, and so I think it's critical. But what role do you think it plays in a founder's journey?
Just yesterday, I was talking to a founder in a company in which I'm angel invested. And that founder was talking about the opportunity to talk to other founders at a similar stage. And just, there's so much that they are contending with and grappling with. Employee expectations have fundamentally changed, right? So even and I mentioned this hybrid workplace, right? So to retreat or not to retreat, like what's the COVID safety protocols? Even though I was talking to Jewel Burks, who's part of Collab Capital and also the head of the US for Google for startups, and she was talking about offering like mental health support for founders, right? It's just, I mean, going all in, people forgetting to eat, and building these, organizations. So it's just very important to have a community you can relate to, and people can support you through the highs and the lows. Like, yeah, if you're going in the fundraising process and everybody's trying to figure out what the right timing is to fundraise right now when firms are pulling back, right? So, and does it make sense? And do I get a Series A extension or, et cetera? Like, what's the right round? How should I put it together? You've got multiple different investors if you're at a certain stage that are giving you kind of, different sets of advice. So I think community keeps one sane. as a practitioner in diversity, I feel like I have a squad and a community that can relate to the challenges and the ambition that I have as well. So you can't underestimate the importance of community.
Yeah, I think you just touched on something really critical, and I think that's kind of community versus network. Can you just speak to how to build a strong community and network?
Yes, that's really good. That's a really good point because there are people that you kind of need to network with, right? That have important connections, investor relationships, or even like sources of federal and statewide funding. Again, that's US or like other governmental funding. And you need to be on the pulse of even changing laws and I mean, even legal representation for founders, right? There are just people that you need to know that can help you operate. The difference between the network and the community is that the network you can certainly lean on and reach out to, and whether it's advice, whether it's something transactional, like it's important. Your community are the people that you can like really emote with, if I'm being honest, right? Those are the people you can pick up and call when things are really challenging. And ideally, you have that type of relationship with your investors and your advisors. But again, there's a personal chemistry to who you feel you can be vulnerable with. As businesses shift, right? You might have a core product that your audience needs to shift or needs to be different. You need to adapt. You need someone that you could go through ideas with who isn't going to judge your ideas as silly or far-fetched, right? These are people you can deeply trust and be vulnerable with. And it includes your personal networks. It can be your friends. It doesn't have to necessarily 100% be people in the same boat as you, but you do want, a mix of people who can relate and that you can trust.
Yeah, I agree. When you're on that founder journey, you need that network, where you're trying to stay just on their mind or get in front of them when it's the right moment in time. But it's there's kind of you're showing your best self and sharing the opportunity, and then there's the people that you have to go to when you need to let it down and say, hey, today was actually really hard. I was speaking with a founder last week, and the minute we got on the call, I knew there was going to be some bad news. And I was like, you know what? This is an important moment in your founder journey. This is where your company wins or closes, and it's up to you. It's the grit that you dig deep and you make it past this week. And all weeks are possible to get past. But that founder, that digging deep, that making it through those moments, and having the community to be able to, help you get through that is actually really important. And like you said, it doesn't have to be an advisor. It doesn't have to be an investor. It doesn't have to be a peer. It can be your partner. It can be your mom.
Yep, 100%. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you got to have that squad. It sounds like you were a key part of that person's community in that moment. So lovely.
So some of our community, we have people from all different levels in their career. How can some people be getting involved without being a founder?
Mm-hmm. It's really exciting to see more operators moving into the investing space and learning about the investing space. I actually myself did a course. So I'm on the steering committee of Black VC. I mentioned them earlier. They have a Black Venture Institute for operators to spend a couple of intensive weeks learning about investing. And most of those folks become angel investors, or maybe they've done some light angel investing. And some of them want to move into investing full time, right? So just learning about the financial side of investing, like the company story, how to evaluate companies. I'm seeing more than ever, information courses. There's a course called Ripple X. They have free information where you can learn about investing. There's a wonderful consultant we work with. His name is Zach Brower. I was actually just talking to him before this call. And he does a lot in teaching about investing and financial modeling, and even like understanding compensation in the space, et cetera. There are a lot of new board members who are on, who maybe have been on public boards, now they're on private boards. And so they need to learn the financial mechanics. So I would say angel investing is one area. I actually, will take us just a second to mention a group that I co-lead called the Black Angel Group. It's formed for employees at Alphabet, at any part of Alphabet, past or present, to learn about angel investing and be involved in deals. And it's meant to be very accessible. So you don't have to put you don't have to be an insanely high net worth individual to participate in a round, because it's a collective. And so the capital's pooled into a vehicle. Advising companies also can be formal or informal. I mean, I mentioned that very early friends and family round, but sometimes the capital you use is your intellectual capital or your social capital for a company rather than financial capital, or in addition to. So I was just talking to someone the other day who wants to, really feels like they can use their operational expertise to help advise companies. And there's a company that I think is actually a really good fit for them to get to know very early stage. It's a company I've been talking to independently, where they could use this person's expertise. So you could be helping these founders early on their journey. Again, if you're part of someone's community, just being that kind of support is really, really helpful. And then, companies are always hiring, and, they need referrals, right? And they need to connect and tap into communities, especially, I try to connect our founders into diverse communities. So organizations like Women Who Code are amazing. I got a chance to work with you all with one of our companies, and their Hack the Planet scholarship Red Panda was doing, right? And so connecting globally with technical talent was really important. So yeah, I think I've named a few here of ways that we can all be part of this ecosystem.
So Candice, I can't emphasize enough how important the work you're doing is. You're also in this position of power and leadership within one of the most really influential tech companies in the world right now, and you're a leader in this space. So I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to, speak with us today, for the commitment and the leadership that you're bringing to Women Who Code. And also, we've just gotten to hear about some of the other organizations that you're influencing. I do have one final pro tip question for you. But I just wanted to make sure I took a moment to acknowledge and express my gratitude. So my final question to you is, what is your quick pro tip that you give to diverse founders?
Quick pro tip. I think despite all the headlines and the news out there about, the economy is XYZ and people are drawing back and et cetera, we witnessed something really incredible over the last couple of years. And even though the momentum, I think, around the diversity conversation has waxed and waned since then, there are more underrepresented fund managers, board members than we've ever seen before. And that means more potential community, more potential capital of all the kinds that I've mentioned above. There never been more opportunities for someone, and whether you have the nichest idea, someone is very interested in that idea, right? And in that space. And so I would say, and something that you shared with, with the person that you were speaking with earlier is there are all kinds of inflection points, but there's not been a better time, right? To really find and connect with people that want to help you on your journey.
Thank you so much, Candice Morgan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So everyone who joined us today, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation or feeling inspired. If you haven't already done it, please join our community at womenwhocode.com. We've got resources and support that we can help you on your journey as a founder or a technologist. So please just visit us on our social channels at Women Who Code or womenwhocode.com. You belong in this community and we are here for you.